Sweet.
What's the
Awesome.
format anyway? I don't actually know what to expect really.
Oh, well, so the format's simple. So, well, welcome to the Smooth Brain Society. But the format's real simple. It is basically I have no clue what you do. Feryl has kind of tossed me in here. Um, and the point is, I'm trying to just learn about your work and about your research, and hopefully ask questions which can help me and the audience like understand the concepts which you use in your research, what you're focusing on. That's basically it. So hopefully it's just a back
Yes.
and forth
Think of this as
conversation.
Ayana's lab. It's that chill. Like, come
Right.
give us a general, like, Sahar will introduce you, and then basically it's over to you to just generally introduce your work. And then we'll just ask you some questions about your work.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, cool.
Super chill.
Cool. So should I just get into introducing you then? So I've already welcomed all the listeners on to back to the Smooth Brain Society. This is one of the Explaining Atheism episodes. So again, Feryl is here, of course, and Feryl has brought along Dr. Hugh Turpin, who is currently working at the School of Anthropology and Museum Ethnography at Oxford, at the University of Oxford. Has a PhD from Queen's University Belfast and Aarhus University Denmark in cognitive anthropology of religion, and most recently has published a book called The Unholy Catholic Ireland. So Hypocrisy, Secular Morality, and Irish Catholicism. Is that a good enough intro, or have I missed a few things here?
I think that's the old title of the book. It changed slightly, so it's called Unholy Catholic Ireland: Religious Hypocrisy, Secular Morality, and Irish Irreligion. That's what it's. But you were close. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, well, that's on the website. That's what I'm going by. I only get your name and I have to Google it. So
my fault then. I didn't update things. Yeah.
Yeah, up to date. But speaking of up to date, if you could give us a little bit of a background of how you got into this field of work and your interest, and then maybe that would open up questions and we can go from there. So just a little background on yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of wonder how far to go and how deeply to probe my own motivations for studying what I study. I mean, so I suppose the bulk of my research, the most significant project so far, has been looking at secularization in the Republic of Ireland. And by secularization, I mean reducing interest in religion, reducing influence of religious institutions over society, all these different metrics. So once upon a time, Ireland was considered a kind of pious outlier in Western Europe. Elsewhere in that part of the world, religion seemed to be losing power more quickly than anywhere else. Ireland was this kind of exception, often because Catholicism and Irishness are deeply intertwined. That's often the reason that's given. However, in recent decades, it's been dropping religion particularly quickly, more quickly than other countries. So, for example, most of these big quantitative data sets, let's say, of other Western European countries like France, let's say, or the UK or Germany, every generation's a little bit less religious than its parents' generation. And it's kind of a smooth intergenerational decline. With Ireland, that's been happening too, but you see it accelerating from kind of the 90s to the present. It kind of goes off a bit of a cliff. And instead of just each generation being less religious than its parents, also everybody's getting less religious all at once, quite quickly. So this makes Ireland a bit of an anomaly. So that's pretty much what I studied. That's the main thing I studied. That's what the book is about. Why this sudden drop? And how does it relate to various things that have been going on here in this country? And how does it relate to, I suppose, what religion, whatever we mean by that, was in the first place in this country? Was there something a bit different about it here that contributed to this kind of rapid drop? And so that's my kind of main thing so far. And currently, I'm working on a sort of follow-up project where I'm looking at atheism, or really, I suppose, really more the rejection of the religion you were brought up in. I'm looking at it in Ireland, Poland, and Northern Ireland in comparison. So these are three European places that are also thought to be sort of quite traditionally religious by the standards of Western and Central Europe, where sort of ethno-national identities and religion are really tightly intertwined. But at least in Ireland and Poland's case, where these are suddenly seem to be kind of coming apart for a lot of people. And Northern Ireland's its own highly complex situation, which maybe I'll get into later. But that's my main thing. And I suppose, theoretically speaking, I began as an anthropologist. I did philosophy as my undergrad ages ago. Came out of it not really knowing what to do with my life. It's probably normal for a philosophy student, I think I went into it because I didn't know what to do with my life. And then came out of it the other end relatively unchanged, perhaps more pretentious than when I went in. And then I just kind of drifted off teaching English in Japan and other places for years, and got tired of it and wanted to return to doing something that I found stimulating. So decided to try my hand at anthropology. So I did a master's in that. I enjoyed it to a certain degree, and also found it frustrating to a certain degree, because I suppose I wanted clearer and more universal answers to big questions. And in recent decades, anthropology has generally moved away from that kind of direction. So, I started, developed an interest in the cognitive science of religion. And I kind of saw, I suppose, an opportunity to put some theories from that to the test within the society that I grew up in, because why was it secularizing so quickly? Why, if, as these people say, religion is somehow sort of almost intuitively human and is found everywhere? Well, it's clearly not. And there are clearly conditions that make it prosper and others that make it decline. So I kind of, thought I'd use some of these tools from the CSR and related disciplines to look at this unusual case of Ireland. But then at the same time, when I started studying Ireland, I kind of realized how much local complexity and nuance there was. So that kind of revived my interest in more traditional social anthropology as well. So the result is, would I dare to call myself a Renaissance man? That seems so arrogant. I wouldn't say I'm that. But my work does kind of combine a certain measure of quantitative kind of big picture causal stuff with nitty-gritty, nuanced, more anthropological detail to try and understand what's happening at a more kind of intimate level. I try to bring those levels together, and I suppose, like, then underneath it all, there is the question, like, why study what you're studying, which is almost like a kind of psychoanalytic question, like, what happened to you when you were growing up that made you have an interest in this, because I could never be one of these people that, for example, says, I'm studying Mesopotamian basket weaving or something like that. Like, I couldn't do that. It has to scratch some itch, something that you experienced somewhere that bothered you, that got in there. And I think for me, it was, growing up in this society that it seemed, you were expected to be Catholic, but at the same time, nobody really took it seriously. It was this very, very bizarre situation where we were living in kind of two worlds at once, with this kind of split dual consciousness, where if asked, you said you're Catholic. If asked in school, particularly the school system being run by the Catholic Church, of course you believe in God, of course, yeah, but it makes no difference whatsoever to your life. It's just a trivial kind of, almost habitual kind of conformist type of experience, patently socially motivated, and not that important, and yet obligatory. It's very ambiguous. It was such a confusing, ambiguous time. And I myself was, I suppose, more openly skeptical than many of my peers in school. That got me a bit of flack in school. People didn't like it that much. And yet suddenly, over the space of a couple of decades, everybody has kind of become the way I was, So I feel pissed off with them, perhaps. What, it wasn't okay for me to ask these questions, and now suddenly it's okay for everyone to ask them. So I don't know. I suppose I wanted to investigate that a bit, or did I just want to kind of linger over the church's decline in this country to a certain degree, because I didn't particularly like going to Catholic school. Now I'm waffling and probably giving away too many personal details, so let's move on. Yeah.
I was actually gonna ask, well, probably not personal details, but I do not know much about Irish history or Irish context apart from a few things, and one of them is that the Irish in general are known to be very Catholic, and the steep drop off is intriguing to me, and therefore I wanted to know: is there any other kind of historic background which I need to know, I need to understand before I get into your book?
Well, I try to give people at least a kind of overview of the historic background. I'm not a historian, but it's important to know a bit about it. What would I say about it? I mean, Ireland has a very keen sense, I suppose, as a society, has long done, of its victimhood and its oppression by England, and involved in that has been the construction of an identity as non-British, some way of maintaining a sense of oneself as different and separate culturally. During the 19th century, Irish as a language was starting to die off. People needed some way, I suppose, of differentiating themselves, and Catholicism, religion, became the main way to do that. And a lot of this was also driven by British prejudice against not just Irish people, but by Catholicism as well. You sort of take the negative stereotypes being used against you and turn them into assets or elements to be defended. And also during the course of the 19th century, specifically after the famine in Ireland, there was a change in the nature of the Catholic Church. Previously, it had been kind of disorganized, poorly staffed. Irish Catholicism was almost a kind of a folk religion. It was not very orthodox. There weren't very high rates of mass attendance, and priests were badly trained, frequently drunken, and didn't have a great deal of control over what people thought and did. It varied in different places in the country. But then in the middle of the 19th century, under a guy called Paul Cullen, Ireland's first archbishop, there was a real drive to reform the church and impose orthodox discipline on the people and make them, in essence, exemplary Catholics. And so the church's manpower increased greatly, its infrastructure increased greatly. Also, by this time, there was no longer a kind of British effort to suppress Catholicism. They kind of realised, well, the Irish are never going to become Protestants in large numbers. So we may as well let them have their religion, and perhaps it can even be a kind of a force for ensuring kind of social order and compliance in a certain degree, So Irish people became very Orthodox Catholic. There became a kind of proliferation of people doing kind of Roman rituals and being concerned with being good, moral, devout Catholics and sexual chastity and all the rest of it. And some of this change can be linked to the changes in society that took place as a result of the famine. A lot of people died and a lot of people emigrated. And what remained, and the people that went on to staff the church, were this kind of emerging Catholic middle class that were very concerned with respectability. And then in the early 20th century, after 1916, after independence, the country kind of emerged as this very poor place, which relied on the church to provide certain social services, healthcare, education, and which was infused with this Catholic nationalism. What is there about Ireland that's enviable? Really, in Europe, it was like this backwater, this impoverished former colony, with little to its name, right beside, England, the old enemy, which was so powerful and successful. And how could we distinguish ourselves? Well, by being the best Catholics in the world, by being the purest and most unimpeachable Catholics. So you had this really, really Catholic society developing after independence, where this kind of the idea of being an Irish person and being a Catholic were almost one and the same thing. And people often ask, did that make Ireland a theocracy? And it wasn't straightforwardly a theocracy. And part of the reason, I suppose, is that the church had such control through the education system and through people's sense of identity as Irish equals Catholic, that there was no need really for priests to dictate to politicians how to run the country. The politicians already intuitively obeyed them because they'd been raised in this hyper-Catholic system. And so that persisted for much of the 20th century. And it started to break apart gradually from the late 1960s onwards. The reason basically being that a new generation of politicians took over that were somewhat less formed by that Catholic nationalism and somewhat more global in their outlook, and what they wanted was to produce the conditions for economic transformation in the country, really. So the education system was somewhat overhauled, and this new economic model developed that was all about getting in foreign money into the country. Foreign direct investment, we call it. Ireland, I suppose the roots were sowed for Ireland's later role in the 1990s as a kind of, and 2000s as a tax haven for American corporations. So after that point in time, you see this kind of shift where people get richer, at first gradually, and then from the 90s pretty quickly. And they still, feel, they're still, as they always say, I was born Catholic. Well, you can't be born Catholic. You're supposed to get baptized Catholic. It's not an ethnic identity, we're told, but in Ireland it pretty much is. But what you have happening over this period of time is the church is receding in importance as a kind of religion in people's lives, and Catholicism is staying there, but just kind of as almost a habitual ethnic identity that you just are, but you don't really think about it all that much, except when a census comes through your letterbox or something like that. Then you remember to tick that correct box. Or when you're in school, you say the right things or participate in various rites of passage because that's what you do. So this kind of more habitual version develops from, let's say, the 70s, 80s onwards. And that kind of loosens the connection. But then, and I suppose maybe we'll get into this later, then you also have, from the 90s onwards, all these kind of revelations about the Catholic past, about these unsavory aspects of that extremely deferent Catholic culture, various scandals, the abuse of children being one, but not the only one. So you get this backlash against that Catholic identity. And that's where we are today. We're somewhere quite far along in that process now. There's a lot of recent history to get into that I haven't got into there because I suppose it's too recent perhaps to be considered the kind of historical background you're talking about. I don't know, when does history end and the present begin? It's I don't know.
Well, technically, your last sentence is also part of history. So,
wow, yeah, that's mind blowing.
But for the purposes of this, I feel you said the recent trends were that people are really rejecting Catholicism at a much greater rate in compared to other countries. Do you think a bit of it is because Catholicism in Ireland was accepted at a lot higher rate, so the initial drop now is a lot steeper and it's receding to the mean, I guess, the word mean in any way?
Is there a mean in these kind of things? I don't know if there is a mean. But yeah, I mean, it is dropping from a higher rate, definitely. And that's part of the explanation. And I think, because it was a bit of a weird situation, really, where you had this really highly religious country that became wealthy quite quickly compared to the speed that other countries might have done so. and was also extremely globalized. It was an English-speaking small country. You couldn't keep the outside world at bay. The effort to kind of maintain Catholic Ireland as this kind of hermetically sealed, devout, insular bubble, when it was sandwiched between the UK and the US and became a kind of, corporate haven for US money, and became an EU member in the 70s. It was a project that was doomed to fail. So I think you're right. It declined from a higher degree, and there are reasons why that it could never be maintained at that higher degree. There are sort of like just factors about the place as a country that meant that conservative Catholic dream was maybe a pipe dream always.
What were some of the other factors involved then? So I guess you mentioned, well, you've touched on saying there was some scandals, and the others probably, being a pipe dream. But what are some of the other factors for this decline?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many that I find it difficult to. Sometimes I find it difficult to kind of say which ones were the most important ones. And I know the ones that are the most important in the public eye and in the media are scandals, basically. So that kind of begins in the early 90s, in 1992 or so. So it's the very beginning of this sort of period where people are becoming a bit more autonomous and less conformist with respect to religion. And I suppose that plays into the media asking questions it previously wouldn't have asked of priests and bishops and the church and this kind of thing. And the first one was there was this Eamon Casey, a bishop, and they found out that he was a real kind of charismatic guy. He was always on the radio, on TV. He was one of the people that kind of introduced Pope John Paul II when he came on this huge visit in Ireland in 1979. And it turned out that Casey had this secret lover, an American woman, and he had fathered a child with her and kept the child secret. And at this point, I think it was 92 or 93 that came out. It created a kind of wave of shock and scandal. The church was this institution that had been telling everybody else how to live, and so had Casey. And then it turned out that he had this secret life. And a lot of people were kind of shocked. Many people were in denial. But it sort of opened the floodgates. And when you look at it now, it was completely innocuous. I mean, who cares if this man has a secret child? Because what was to come out later, the next wave, I suppose, was revelations of paedophile priests molesting children, And so what you kind of see in Ireland is these waves of scandal, and they get bigger each time. So there was instances of particular abuse of priests, like Brendan Smith was a famous one. And then it turned out that their activities have been known about and concealed by the church. So you get kind of another expansion where now the entire institution starts to get implicated in these things. And then you get kind of further kind of reappraisals of that Catholic culture. And, you get, for example, revelations coming out about Magdalene laundries. These are institutions where women who were in some way deemed, less than perfect examples of Catholic rectitude were basically imprisoned and made to work in menial drudgery kind of labor, and often abused. And then you have the industrial schools, kind of very abusive institutions where poor and orphan children were interned. And you get this kind of new picture emerging, I suppose, in the mid 2000s of not just of there being a lot of clerical abuse or the church being corrupt, but somehow of all of that Catholic society being a cruel, abusive, dark kind of a place. So you get this kind of reappraisal of Catholic Ireland, basically, a kind of inverted image, whereas before it's seen as this kind of bastion of moral purity. It begins to look like this kind of almost totalitarian, abusive, dark kind of a place in public representations as people are revisiting and excavating these kind of secrets. There are all these government reports coming out, and survivors are coming forward, and it's still going on to the present. In 2017, a new category of institution was kind of being investigated: the mother and baby homes. These are places where women who got pregnant outside of marriage were shuttered up in shame, and they gave birth, and then the church basically, as far as we can understand, sold a lot of the children to American couples looking for kids to adopt, and the death rates were very high in these institutions for children as well. Big controversy came when they found a load of, I think, infant remains in a disused septic tank beneath one of these institutions. So there was that. And then the latest wave, I suppose, there's been yet another wave of scandal, revolves around sexual abuse in elite institutions. So the kind of Irish equivalents of British public schools. So previously, previous things I'd looked at kind of abuse mostly in, the industrial schools and by the Christian Brothers, a religious order that taught in a lot of Irish schools. And now it's even the upper crust of society are coming forward with their kind of revelations of having been molested and it being covered up. And it just seems to be a kind of ever-spreading rot that moves through layers and layers of the past and becomes more entrenched and more difficult to quarantine as the years go by, to the point where now people ask questions like, how did people not know all this stuff was going on? To what degree did they know but turn a blind eye? What was this society? So you have this kind of expanding contamination of the Catholic past. And of course, from what I said earlier about this kind of decline in deep affiliation with the church to begin with, as the country becomes richer and more autonomous and more confident, you have new generations being, brought up in an environment where Catholicism is personally not very important, and what they associate with it is the horrible stuff they see on the news. It's this kind of irrelevant, sort of vaguely weird thing they talk about sometimes in school about, love. God is love. And then it's this really dark stuff. Why would they want to remain affiliated? And into that, you have the situation where the church, left over from that deferent sort of Catholic past, there are certain things encoded in Irish law, or there were, like we had very, very strict anti-abortion laws for a while, for a long while, that were repealed in 2018. And there was a sort of, in 2015, a campaign for the legalization of same-sex marriage as well. And through the Irish constitution, through the way politics works here, the way these questions get decided is by public referendums. So a referendum is called, for example, on whether or not to liberalize abortion laws. And there's loads of campaigning, and this, it creates this situation where people are given an option, I suppose, to oppose the Catholic position. And they kind of, in the course of this, there's a lot of campaigning and a lot of dirty stuff gets dredged up again, and there's a lot of acrimony. But it also, once the tallies come in and it's found that, people have voted to liberalise abortion laws, people kind of realise, how Catholic were we really in the first place if we all just voted this way, or the majority voted this way? So these kind of referenda are like big kind of public revelations where afterwards it's sort of enacted and disclosed that actually we're not that Catholic, are we? And they also create tension between people that want to keep these restrictions in place and people that don't. So you get this kind of, and you'll often see this, where religion is a bit of a kind of a threat to secular freedoms. You get strong anti-religious stances. You get this in the US, for example. Whereas, if you look at Denmark or somewhere, there are plenty of atheists there that don't even really think about it, or there are plenty of people that call themselves Lutherans and they don't believe, they don't care about not believing. It's irrelevant. It's a nice little tradition. Now, there is a bit of that in Ireland too, but there are also the conditions that will build up a strongly anti-religious stance. Yeah.
Hugh, I think you've explained this so well. I could listen to you literally all day.
Oh,
But my question then is, Catholicism still exists despite there being
oh.
several reasons for it to not exist in Ireland. So what is the function that Catholicism serves now? Why is it that people still identify as Catholic, even though they may not particularly believe in it?
Yeah, well, let's see. I mean, the majority of the population still identify as Catholic. In a way, I think there are probably several layers and answers to that. I'll try and go through them. One, I suppose, is family. Like grandparents are quite religious, perhaps. Parents a bit less so, but still somewhat. And people don't want to damage intergenerational harmony and that kind of thing. So they'll continue to baptize their kids. It's not a big part of their life, but they're willing to do these things just to keep social relations ticking over smoothly. Then you've got the institutional dimension. So the church still controls much of the education system, the vast majority of it. And even though the law has changed and they're not supposed to be able to discriminate based on religious affiliation, some people still think that they do. And there's just a kind of intuition there that it's the case. So people will baptize their kids, because they think it's favorably it has a favorable impact on their educational outcomes. And then there's also just sort of a feeling of not wanting to be ostracized. In school, all the kids do their rites of passage. They have their first confession and their communion and their confirmation. God, I remember going through these things, and they don't want their kids to be ostracized. And so everybody kind of collectively does it, even though no individual is perhaps all that interested in it. Nobody wants to be, not nobody, but there's a reluctance to be the one that bucks the trend, Then there's also the fact that the church is growing less powerful, is kind of, and has for a few decades tried to sort of made itself over in a more forgiving image. And, people don't want to sever themselves from their traditions and their sense of historical, ethnic, even identity. There's a lot to like about Catholic tradition and the past as well. It's not just this abusive image. And, this people kind of want to retain a sense of continuity with the past. They want to retain a sense of how would you say, community, something like that. And the way this is achieved is through things associated with the church. And I think a part of it as well, another part of it is it's grown much less relevant. And the irrelevance itself preserves it. Because if the thing is not that much of an imposition anymore, if being Catholic now really just means your kids get to do a communion, rite of passage in school, which is an exciting event where all the kiddies get dressed up. They all get told they're special. They all get to shake their relatives down for money, and they all get an iPhone 13 at the end of it with that money. Why would you not want to be part of that? It's fun and it's easy, and there's no great kind of weight. So it's a funny thing. It's a very strange thing in Ireland. You have this ambiguity where the Catholicism is associated with a kind of soft core sense of belonging and community, even aside from matters of belief. Belief is for fanatics and Protestants. Like maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't. That might be the kind of attitude. You don't have to make up your mind about the thing. To have a definite position is to be probably a little bit strange. It's better just to float in this hazy ambiguity. There's no need to decouple, and there's no need to rock the boat. So it's that kind of flexible, vaguely relevant kind of ethno-Catholic, comforting, belonging tie is still very strong in the country. And that means you get a weird kind of front of tension between the ex-Catholic people, the people who think that by maintaining this link, you're propping up a contaminated and immoral institution. And then the other people who are like, God, you people are just like a kind of oppressive fundamentalists, just like the Catholics that came before. Can't we just, have our communions and our iPhone 15s and our, Catholic funerals, and can't you just let us be ambiguous and somewhat inconsistent? What harm is there in it? So you get a funny kind of tension that way as well. And I suppose a question becomes like, the future. Is Irish, non-religion going to continue to increase very rapidly? I don't know really. I think it could go either way. Which of these positions is going to? I mean, they're both going to continue into the future. Sorry, vague tailing off there. Sorry.
No, that's good. The thing which I was thinking of with what you said was something which you also said at the very beginning, where you're talking about leaving Catholicism and then you're talking about atheism. And are those two separate things or one and the same? Because I feel one is this hazy middle while the other is, as you said, the people who say no, there is no God. So when you talk about atheism in your work, or when you talk about leaving religion in your work, are you talking about the same thing, or are these like slightly different concepts, and are you making like distinctions between them?
Good question. Yeah, they're different concepts, and there's a number of ways that they're different. I mean, atheism is really about a lack of belief, let's say, and even within that, there are like positive and negative understandings of that. Is it just the absence of a belief in a God, for example, or is it actively believing that there isn't one? And you can have that position alongside Catholic identity, confusingly enough, especially in Ireland, or without it. I mean, here's a good quote for you. I'm just going to pull it out to give you an example of what that's like. Sorry, just bear with me a sec. So this is a quote from like the 1970s, I think. It's a famous novelist, John McGahern, who basically left Ireland because he was fired from his teaching job, and one of his books was banned. A lot of books were banned in Catholic Ireland, and he married a foreign Protestant, and he said that was part of the reason for this prejudiced reaction against him. But then he returned to Ireland and went to live in rural Ireland in Leitrim, I think it was, and got to know the locals there. And here's a conversation he had with one of them. Why don't you go to Mass, John? I was asked by a dear friend and neighbour once. I'd like to, but I'd feel a hypocrite. Why would you feel that? Because I don't believe. But sure, none of us believe. Why do you go then? We go for the old performance, to see the girls, to see the whole show. He was completely unfazed by my question, even mimicking the pious prancing of a fashionable woman as she approached and left the communion rail, and laughed out loud. We go to see all the other hypocrites. So even in Catholic Ireland, there's possibly the case that there were quite a few people who were atheists, maybe even kind of acknowledged it a bit of one another, but you still went through the motions, partly as a matter of social pressure, and perhaps you cultivated this interior cynicism, but you were still, Irish and Catholic, even if you had that kind of hidden, concealed atheism. So you can have atheism alongside Catholic identity. Now you see the emergence of a kind of new, more strident, more kind of, you see that the new atheist movement, you associated with Dawkins and people like this, and that that was pretty popular here in Ireland because it arrived at the same time as all these scandals I've just talked about. So, yeah, they created an upsurge in that kind of strong atheist identity, which is quite different to what I just read out, where you wouldn't go along with that kind of Catholic stuff. You'd be a principled atheist and you'd oppose all of it, and your behavior and your beliefs would have to align properly, But then there are all these people as well who've stepped away from Catholicism. Some of them may continue to think of themselves in some sense deep down as Catholic, but they have no truck with the church anymore. They don't practice. Their beliefs would not be orthodox, but they might not be atheists. They might have kind of spiritual but not religious type beliefs. They might be agnostic. There are a whole explosion of different stances. So to say that everyone who leaves Catholicism becomes an atheist, or that all atheists have left Catholicism, that would be a huge simplification. And it would be wrong,
I like to say that you coined this term, but you did not. But let's say that you popularized this term, fuzzy
fidelity. Oh, no, it was
fidelity.
popular before. I know what you're going to say now. Yeah.
Yeah, but can you tell us more about it and how it relates to this phenomenon of
fuzzy fidelity?
Not believing, of not believing but still being in the religion.
Yeah, that's David Voss's term. So we'll give credit to David for that. So I think what fuzzy fidelity is in these kind of quantitative measures in the European Social Survey and the WVS or stuff like that. You get a lot of kind of, I suppose the true marker of a secularizing society is growing disinterest in religion, not necessarily fiery objection to religion. That suggests religion is already strong in the society. Apathy is a better indicator that religion is actually fading. And fuzzy fidelity refers really to people who may go on to affiliate with the tradition, may have kind of score in the middle of these kind of measures of belief and that kind of thing. Do you or do you not believe in a God? I'll give that a kind of like a middling 3 out of a 6 or something like that. So they're kind of just phoning it in, really. They're not motivated to leave outright. They're not that interested in practicing. Belief is who knows? It's a side question. It's not very relevant. And I think what you see is growing numbers of people like that in a lot of European societies over the course of the 20th century. More and more people adopt that kind of stance. So you get this new kind of ordinary baseline emerging of relative religious indifference with a very superficial tie, perhaps motivated just by the kind of things I described earlier in Ireland of community and belonging and not wanting to rock the boat and not even caring that much. That becomes the new norm. That's fuzzy fidelity. You keep the connection because you're not bothered rejecting it, really. But I suppose what one might say about that is that if a motivation arrives from outside or from within, that suddenly drags that into awareness, I think you can see a kind of bit of a cascade effect. And I think that's maybe what we saw in Ireland. And I think in Ireland, I think fuzzy fidelity might have been a little different because the sheer combination of that kind of ethno-Catholic nationalist identity means that people who were in effect apathetic and fuzzy fidelity people on surveys and that kind of thing through habit and socially desirable responding might have been, looking more Catholic than they really were. And then into this kind of situation, you have the scandals I described launched into this kind of situation of fuzzy fidelity and apathy in a fairly large swathe of the population. And then you see this sort of drop off effect. Yeah.
Do you think there are places where religion and is kind of growing or increasing in the sense that you kind of hear a lot of well, I guess because most of your information comes from media, and in media you usually see extremes, and you often see, for example, during when Russia invaded Ukraine and a lot of Ukrainian refugees were pouring in to Europe, you had a lot of news presenters and reporters saying people would take them in because they're like us, they're Christians, our Christianity is showing, and all that, and we wouldn't do this to Syrian refugees or whatever because it's a different religion.
Yeah.
Do you think there are places in the world, or there are certain circumstances which could probably increase religiosity as much as you've shown how in Ireland they've decreased over time?
Yeah, I think there probably are. Where to begin with this huge question? Let's talk about the Syrians and the Ukrainians for a moment. There's this sense that we'll let them in because of their religion. This is like very much the Polish situation, where they were very welcoming to Ukrainian refugees, far more than they were. The possibility of Muslim refugees seemed to terrify the conservative elements of Polish society, and was used to sort of as a conservative talking point quite frequently. There, we can't let them in, but it suddenly changed when it was the Ukrainians. Yeah, I mean, is it religion, or is it more like religion as a proxy for sort of ethnic similarity or something like that? They're white too. That's really what they're saying. But I think there are situations that could. Well, it's such a big question. I mean, if you look at the main theory, I suppose, on secularization is this idea of growing existential security, and that the more people are secure and they unthreatened either by economic factors or other threats, the more they let go of religion. They don't need it so much anymore. Now, whether that's because they don't need the comfort of the beliefs, or they don't need the support of the communities, or they practice less and thus the ideas transmit less, we don't really know. But it does seem that those kind of conditions create a drop in religion. So the corollary of that would probably be that the opposite conditions would potentially increase it. Greater insecurity, greater threat might drive up commitment to religious identities that are tied to your group, particularly because you need the support of the group, or you're opposing another group that has different kind of religious background, and that might drive up that religious identity. So yeah, there are definitely conditions where you could see that happening. I don't think secularization is some kind of teleological, one-way, predetermined kind of historically, linear kind of thing. It could go into reverse, could stop happening. Who knows? But like one thing I've been thinking about lately that interests me, that I can't quite square with this existential security model, is that what you hear a lot after, I suppose, decades of neoliberal rule in the West, this idea of Thatcherism and Reaganism wearing away at the social security net in Western societies and that kind of thing, and people now, young people now, not being able to get stable jobs and not being able to get houses, and they're bled dry by rent, and their mental health is going down the toilet, and social media is driving us mad, blah, blah, Donald Trump, the planet's burning, all the rest. And so you seem to be getting this surge in feelings of insecurity among young people, it would appear, and yet that's also the demographic that's rejecting religion. I mean, so that seems to fly in the face slightly of the existential security hypothesis. But I think maybe the problem is that we need to have a more expansive definition of. Do we need a more expansive definition of religion, or do we need to acknowledge that religion has served particular functions in the past, and there are other things that are fulfilling those needs now that people are turning to, where they once may have turned to religion? So young people, they might be put off from a return to traditional religion because of its moral conservatism, probably, in the societies I'm talking about, the Western European American type societies. But maybe the fortunes of strong atheism are also in decline. It might be seen as not a particularly comforting worldview. It might be that people are getting into spirituality and meditation. A little bit of astrology. God knows, what direction people are going in. Maybe religion was this kind of combined package in the past that gave people a sense of group belonging, a sense of beliefs that kind of ameliorated suffering and gave them a greater sense of security, something to turn to. And the package is coming undone, is unraveling. People can feel like they're part of a community now over the internet. They can kind of get a simulation of that, at least. They can get a sense of control, perhaps through, wellness or spiritual practices or something like that. They can have a sense of moral character and virtue by embracing various causes and campaigning for them. Where all of this might have been tied together before by religions, but now we seem to be in some sort of place where this is unraveled a bit. So it could be that people are doing some of the stuff that you would expect in conditions of existential insecurity, but it's no longer connected up to those traditional religious identities as it was before. I don't know. But I think that's something that would merit further study. If the existential security model is the one, like how come under conditions of increasing insecurity in at least the kind of like Western capitalist nations, that's the way people feel among the young, how come they're not going back to religion? Yeah.
I mean, there's also the pluralism hypothesis. The more you are exposed to different worldviews, the more you're exposed to different ideas, the less likely you will be to adhere to one, which probably also explains the new religion trends that are coming up, where people are just coming up with a mix and mash of different religions. And
yeah, there is that pluralism thing, and I suppose there's also if the general culture. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just say something to that? Which, even I feel pluralism itself isn't new in its idea, because didn't Akbar, who was one of the emperors in the Mughal Empire, didn't he start his own religion at one point of time, which was a mix and match of Hinduism and Islam and a few other religions of that time, from memory? So I think even that kind of concept of breaking and picking and choosing aspects of religion isn't necessarily a new one. Sorry, I just wanted to.
I think you're definitely right there. I'm trying to think of other examples, but Japan being a long-standing example where Buddhism, Shintoism, kind of elements of Confucianism are kind of mixed and matched and fused together, and it's definitely the idea that people didn't do this in the past, I think is wrong. Perhaps with the rise of the monotheisms and their kind of fanatical insistence on there only being one God, and you better, and the religions of the book where sign up to this completely or not at all. But I think the norm was probably to pick and mix in many societies for most of history. Yeah. Where were we? Oh, the pluralism thing. Yeah. Is that driving it down now? Might be. The pluralism, and also, I suppose, the greater individualism of people, that they kind of want they want to be able to tailor a thing, even if everyone ends up kind of tailoring it the same way, and individualism actually looks like a bit of a conformist collective kind of thing. After all, people want the feeling that they're sculpting and carving out this particular thing for themselves. Yeah, I don't know. That was really vague. Sorry. Yeah.
That was good. Okay, from the vagueness and from the theory, can we talk about your actual work? Because you also said that you've done a lot of quantitative stuff. So could you give me some sort of an idea of what that was like?
Okay, yeah. What quantitative stuff have I done? So I suppose I began much of the direction I've gone in my research is a result of the failure of an initial oversimplistic idea. That was, there's this idea in the cognitive science of religion. It's a good idea, and it's got a place. Credibility enhancing displays that religious beliefs transmit, because there is no proof, verification in the world of the existence of the gods. And how does somebody growing up in a social world come to take these things seriously? Well, the cue, the trigger, is the social behavior that they see around them. Other people are acting in such a way that suggests that they really do think these things are true. A cultural learner is likely to take them on board. And so I encountered this idea around the time that Irish religion was dropping, and all these hypocrisies and scandals were emerging from the Catholic Church. And I thought, well, what about credibility undermining displays? Could it be that the opposite is causing this kind of opposite effect, where believers are having their bubbles burst by these sudden revelations that maybe the paragons of their religion actually don't seem to be acting like they believe in it? And I tried to test this quantitatively with an experiment that primed participants with one of two kind of stories about a priest, one which he was kind of virtuous individual, and one in which he was a paedophile or something like that. A crud, cred versus crud. Then I measured their levels of belief, both explicitly and using an implicit association task, which is itself a controversial task that many people think doesn't actually work. And I found nothing, And the more I talked to people, I realized this was just the wrong way to go. That it's infinitely more complex than that. It's questionable whether people really believe that much, even to begin with. The ones that are now dropping it. So the idea that there was this simple reaction between scandal and apostasy in Ireland, a simple equation that I could test through an experiment, was just a naive pipe dream of a PhD student, So that experiment didn't work. And then I used more kind of exploratory survey-based methods, as well as my interviews and fieldwork after that. One of which I like talking about was the free list methodology. So this is where you just prompt somebody with a term, like, for example, Catholic Church. The Catholic Church. What comes to mind when you think of the Catholic Church? And then your participant lists all their kind of associations. So, like, for example, my ones, I think I have them here. Yeah, I had hundreds of people respond to this, and I split them between those, let's say, still call themselves Catholic, and those who no longer call themselves Catholic. The whole sample was baptized Catholic. And just with these kind of intuitive, swift associations, the Catholics have clergy, mass, sacraments, communion, churches, Pope, God, that kind of stuff. The ex-Catholics, the first association, the swiftest thing they think of when they think of the Catholic Church is paedophilia. It's what comes to mind like that. After that, clergy, you have the idea of corruption, conservatism, authoritarianism, the education system, which is dominated by the church. So it's an entirely negative list, and it's a good way of getting these kind of swift reactions. I used a lot of different quantitative measures, and what I found was I used a measure of these credibility enhancing displays as well. And yeah, the less people had seen their parents act as though they believed, the less people themselves believed. So it kind of showed that there was this dual effect going on. Religion was fading, but into this condition of intergenerational fading was arriving this really negative, dark image at the same time. So I was able to use this kind of survey to show that more complicated picture than the kind of initial simplistic crud experiment that I tried to run. And yeah, that's one example, because so I used that survey to just see the extent to which people were rejecting Catholicism and what basically seemed to be their associations with it if they did. And then I combined that with the more qualitative stuff to dig deeper into what these associations did out there in the social world. Why were they so salient? How did people react to people who had different associations with the whole thing? But Yeah, and then like it's because we've kind of been on this theme now of Catholic Ireland. I have completely different work as well, that I use experiments to probe, which I can talk about if you want. That's got nothing to do with any of the rest of this. But is that too much of a non sequitur? I don't know.
I was just working on free lists today when Sahir walked into my office and scared me.
Oh yeah, we could
Yeah.
do it.
We'll chat about that after the podcast. But before we segue into your experiments, can you tell us more about your work that's happening in Poland and North Ireland right now,
I can tell you,
and how it's related to your?
but I don't have the results yet. So we're doing the interviews right now. I'm working with some researchers in Białystok University in Poland, and I'm working with a young researcher up in Northern Ireland. And so we're doing and I'm doing interviews here in Ireland, and we're getting 30 per country, where we're just kind of getting the stories of people that consider themselves to have left Catholicism, and also cultural Catholics in Ireland and Poland, and in the north we're getting representatives of all the different religious backgrounds. So in the north, classically, it's this divided society where you have the Catholics, and then you have various forms of Protestant, like the Church of Ireland, Presbyterian are the two biggest. Even within Presbyterian, there are subdivisions. So we're getting people, and there are people with mixed background. So we're getting interviews with all these people, and then I'm going to look through them and see what kind of themes are emerging, and make representative surveys to try and get a kind of more. So I'll have the intimate detail again, but I'll also have the more coarse-grained, but perhaps more representative data from the survey on what's causing the declines in religion in these societies. And certainly, I think with Poland, it's a situation that's fairly similar in some respects, though with important differences too, to the Irish situation. I mean, recently in Poland, we've just seen a big change in government, where the Law and Justice Party that ruled the country for the last while, that was very, very conservatively Catholic, and that not too long ago passed very restrictive abortion laws, has just lost power, largely because of a youth backlash. So that's somewhat reminiscent of the kind of rapid secularization that we've seen in Ireland. It's very driven by opposition to conservative morality and the imposition of kind of theocratic restrictions on women and on that kind of sexual life and these kind of things. So yeah, it's Poland is sort of close to what you see in Ireland, and also maybe what you see in the United States, with this kind of accelerating non-religion there based on opposition to the connection between Christianity and republicanism. Northern Ireland is much more complex, at least for me. You know, people think it's both. They're both the same Ireland. You know, island. They're both parts of Ireland. Shouldn't it be straightforwardly comparable? But it's not really. You know, it's this divided society traditionally, where leaving your religion is harder to do, because you're leaving your tribe. You're kind of like, that's a win for the other side if you do it. You don't want to do that. And there are patterns within Northern Irish non-religion, it seems, that require further explanation. It seems that more of the non-religious people now in Northern Ireland come from a Protestant than a Catholic background. One has to ask questions about why that might be. And that's kind of what I'm exploring now. It's not that there aren't, I mean, religious practice has been in decline among the Catholics. There are, of course, non-religious people from a Catholic background that no longer affiliate. There are plenty of atheists. I mean, there always have been. The Catholic tradition up north draws on many, many different intellectual sources. Like there are, you know, Marxism and socialism were important components of elements of Irish republicanism as well, you know, as Catholicism. So there are very, very different strands that are all drawn together, but you might still be a Catholic even if you're an atheist. That doesn't seem to be as true on the other side somehow. And also, I've noticed people are compared to down here in the south, where you get associations with the Catholic Church and with non-religious people, and bang, it's all this, like, they're hypocrites, they're pedophiles, they're authoritarians, they're all this kind of stuff. That stream of associations so far, in my experience, doesn't seem to be as strong for Northern Catholics. And there are reasons why this might be. One is the Catholic Church didn't have direct control over society in the north to the same degree it did down south. But the more I read about the history of what is often called the two communities up there, and the loyalist Protestant image of the church, the Catholic Church, and Catholics is often of the church as this kind of Machiavellian, dark, controlling force that's kind of hell-bent on capturing the North and on undermining Northern Protestants and Catholics themselves as kind of feckless, lazy, kind of. So there's a lot of the traditional historical image that Protestants had of Catholics is it can be a bit bigoted, and there's bigotry going both ways, but the nature of that bigotry is somewhat different. And I think it's possible that if that's your background up north, to adopt this dark image of the Catholic Church, almost like adopting the image your traditional enemies have of your group, and that kind of probably inhibits people from. So they may well complain about the church among themselves, but to openly adopt that kind of anti-Catholic image, I think it's much more difficult in a situation where you have an outgroup that is anti-Catholic, that you're then playing into their hands. So I think that complicates it. And then in terms of the growing kind of non-religion within Northern Irish society, I mean, an important thing, of course, is that the society is basically at peace now since the Good Friday Agreement. So younger people are not growing up with the same levels of sectarian tension they had before. So that's why you're seeing it growing partly. And a big factor in a lot of the interviews I've noticed seems to be the kind of experience of stepping beyond the bounds of your community. A lot of people talk about going to college, where they meet people from the other side, or they go to college in the UK and they meet, and they realize that the kind of tightly interwound kind of identities and that they had before, that they can let those go, yeah. So I wonder, I need to look into it more, but I wonder, is there kind of like a really rather pronounced social class dimension, even more so in Northern Ireland, to leaving your religious affiliation than there is. I mean, that dimension exists here in the south, but I wonder, is it even more strongly tuned in the north, where a kind of, imagine that the middle class Protestant might leave Northern Ireland, go to university in the UK, not really plan on coming back, and but for somebody from a more working class, deindustrialized background, the typical person, obviously there's a huge variety of people and experiences, but it might not be so easy to up sticks and leave your sort of ethno-religious community in the same way. It might keep that link stronger, even if you don't believe. You might still think, no, I'm still a Protestant. The people around me are still part of that ethnic group, and my fate is still tied to theirs. I can't just, I don't have some sort of really transferable, desirable skills as a kind of IT specialist that I can get a job anywhere in the world. No, I'm rooted to this place, these traditions. So I feel hesitant even talking about the work because it's currently in process. These are just kind of rough initial insights that may be overturned in time as we do more interviews and as I do the survey. But I will say that the more I look at it, the more complex it's getting, and the more I feel I don't understand it, to be honest. And that I need to look more and more at it to try and figure it out. No, we're different, these places look from one another, even though from the outside, see, oh, there's something somewhat similar going on in that religion was stronger than elsewhere in much of Europe, and now it's in decline. They're very, very different too from each other. So exploring that is exciting and also intimidating. Yeah.
It sounds really exciting, and I would love to have you on again to talk about what you find once all the surveys and everything is done.
I'd love to.
And you have, I guess research is always an ongoing thing, right? It's never actually done, but
Yeah.
let's say next phase. Yeah. I have a lot of questions in the sense I was thinking about, when you're giving examples, especially the one of the having two opposing groups in the same place, and in the sense leaving one is sort of like leaving your tribe is sort of, even if you're not directly joining the other one, it might be a bit hesitant. Do you and you also mentioned about Ireland in general trying to be anti-British and therefore really adopting the kind of Catholic moniker. And I was just comparing it to all these other countries which I've lived in, or like trying to compare the difference, it's just a personal anecdote. I have no actual evidence for this, but it often felt like when I went to the UK to study versus when I lived in India, it felt like the people who practice Hinduism and Islam and did like the kind of traditional practices seemed to do it a lot more in the UK than they did in India. And
Right.
it was this kind of thing where maybe they're doing it, well, one, because they miss home, but also maybe the idea of, if I give this up, I'm giving up this thing which the West was obviously anti for so long, and it still is in many respects. So yeah, I was just,
It's interesting.
there's no actual question. It was just these thoughts going through my mind.
It's a real question, isn't it, about the pluralism thing that Feryl mentioned earlier. Like, does it, in an environment where there are a lot of different religious identities, does it enhance or does it reduce them? And what are the conditions that determine that? And because I mean, if these are part of an identity that perhaps is just almost unconscious at home, but then you move to another place and it becomes salient, perhaps because it's discriminated against, or because you feel you don't quite fit in and you're never going to be let fit in. Does that amplify that kind of, what choice do you make? Do you leave it behind and attempt to integrate in some way, or do you amplify that cultural identity and feel closer to other people who are also from your place of origin because of this kind of more salient sense of yourself as being this kind of a person? It can go different ways, can't it?
There's a lot of evidence about diaspora communities really preserving their cultural traditions.
Oh yeah.
In almost as if it was in a time capsule. So when I was in London, when I was doing my master's, I went to celebrate Navratri, and then I did some research there. So Navratri is this Hindu Gujarati festival where you basically dance every evening for 9 days. I'm giving you a very basic definition of the festival. And in Bombay, which is where I'm from, the culture has diversified where everyone dances in their own little circles, and there's a lot of variation in the kind of folk dance, and it's a lot of creativity and innovation. Whereas when I was in London, they all danced in concentric circles around the goddess, and they all did the same step in an almost very regimented way of performing the ritual. And it was, to answer your, I mean, I'm not answering the question, Sarah, but to a degree, it almost felt like it came from a form of preservation that we hadn't held on to back home.
Yeah.
But
I
the
think you're right.
had.
I mean, the classic example from where I'm standing is often Irish Americans have blah blah disclaimer about variety, and there's all sorts of different people and blah blah blah. But sometimes you get the sense that they they've held on to the idea of being Irish and Catholic a lot more than we have here, and they might sometimes look at Ireland today and think, what the hell is happening? What's happening to the old country? It's changed. It's not really Ireland anymore. Yeah, I just think about tourists coming over and looking for the family roots and wearing their tweed flat caps and they're with a shamrock tattooed on their arm and stuff like that. And like, we're not really like that, guys, But yeah, they're not all like that, of course. But there is a certain contingent that seems to have clung on very, very strongly to a notion of Irishness that seems a little bit dated. Yeah, because somehow, yeah, it is, isn't it? When you move to a new place, somehow the traditions that were there at the point at which you moved are frozen in aspic, and then you're kind of you've got this sense of yourself as well as different and need to preserve those traditions to I suppose to have a group around you that supports you. And how do you know your group in this big kind of complex society? Well, by sharing traditions with them. These are the people you can rely on, the people that have these cultural markers, so you preserve them. Yeah.
Awesome. Sarah, do you have any more questions?
I would love to talk about this a lot, for a lot longer, but also one, it's 12:30 at night here. Two, we've been recording for an hour 17 minutes. So I think we need to get Hugh on again, of course, and then we can talk about this a lot more because this is really interesting, and these are things which I don't really think of in my day-to-day work and life as well. And of course, philosophy. You can keep discussing these things for ages, can't you?
Yeah.
When you get the philosophy aspect into it as well. But
That is right.
should we then do the wrap-up stuff? Should we?
Yeah.
Unless Feryl, did you want to cover a couple of things before? Yeah.
Yeah. So Hugh, before we start doing the wrap-up stuff, can you, in a minute, just summarize your project that is affiliated to EA?
Okay.
For social media, so just in a minute.
Social media, that thing. Okay. So I'm looking at the growth of atheism and non-religion in three European societies that are often thought of as secularization outliers, but now seem to be changing unusually quickly. And that is Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Poland. And yeah, I'm right in the thick of it right now. I have no results as of yet. Well, provisional results. But yeah, so the project will look at the elements that are held in common between these situations where kind of national or ethnic identity and religion are very tightly intertwined, and how that affects the secularization trajectory. And I suppose what we're kind of provisionally hypothesizing is that in these conditions, religion is sort of seems to be preserved outwardly, but it can tip perhaps more rapidly in these societies if the conditions are correct, if there are kind of factors that cause people to turn against these sort of habitual, somewhat conformist kind of identities. Yeah. And thus far, I feel like this may be true of Ireland and Poland in particular, but I'm getting the impression as I do the research that the North is quite distinctive from the other two.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're ready to move on to the wrap-up stuff.
Cool. Yeah. So what we do is we always ask people, like every researcher, but the list is the same, about 10 questions, which are kind of rapid fire. Not all of them are actually rapid fire. Some require a bit of thinking, but just to have like a nice, consistent kind of ending. So, Feryl, do you want to ask the first question? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you prefer summer or winter?
Man, I mean, my birthday and Christmas are both in winter, and I used to love those, but now summer. As I get older, it's summer. Yeah. In fact, I've just come back from Lanzarote, getting a little bit of summer in the winter, So, yeah.
Movies or TV shows?
Movies, with the exception of Twin Peaks, which I love. Yeah.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs, because I'm allergic to cats. So much as I might want to love them, I'm not able to.
If you could have a superpower, what superpower would you have?
Oh, I think invisibility, because I'm just quite an anxious person, and sometimes I just want to disappear from social situations. It'd be fantastic if I actually could. Yeah.
That is the most relatable thing ever. What's your favorite cuisine or food?
Wow. Oh man. I mean, probably. I don't know. It depends on my mood, but I'll say Japanese because I lived there for a while and I got to like it quite a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. What is your least favorite type of music?
Oh yeah, maybe rap metal. I mean, what a horrible combination! Just mashing the two of them together. Limp Bizkit are probably my least favorite band ever. There's just something so crass about them. They just embody everything I hate. It's just really, really annoying. Yeah.
Yeah, that I haven't even heard of them, and I'm kind of glad I haven't.
Better Google them now.
Yeah, they're painful.
Yeah, they are.
No, I think they've got a couple of decent songs, but generally speaking, yeah.
Okay. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would that be?
Oh wow. It's so big. The world is big. I really liked. I lived in Denmark previously, and I really liked it. And as I get old and tired, the idea of a kind of easy living society is more and more appealing. I wish I could give you an exciting answer to this and say, I want to live in the Amazon rainforest or something like that. But no, I just want to live in a middle of the road Danish city and eat my cinnamon canal snail for breakfast and wander down to the beach and have a dip in the sea. Maybe go into a sauna and sit around. Yeah, that sounds lovely.
That sounds lovely, but the winters must be real harsh.
That's true. I'd like to go somewhere else for the winters. Can I have two places?
If you wish. Of course, it's your answer.
Maybe I don't know. I really don't know. I feel like I don't want to live in Ireland anymore because of the brutal house prices over here and the hell of trying to get, to afford somewhere to live. I feel resentful of this country. I mean, it's not the country's fault, but like the way the housing situation is pissed me the hell off. So I often fantasize about moving elsewhere. Denmark seems like a nice spot. Or maybe I'd go back to Kyoto where I lived before because, for me, nostalgia is important. I know that, my brain revisits the past and I start to sentimentalize places I've been before. So I would probably end up going back to one of them.
All right. What's something which people say which you think is stupid or nonsensical?
What's something people say?
Yeah, so what's a quote or saying people say which you think is stupid or nonsensical?
I'm quite a cantankerous and in some ways intolerant person that's regularly irritated during the course of the day. So it's actually nothing specific as there must be something.
I feel like the whole podcast, you were like popping off with like all the theories and all your answers, and these questions have stumped you.
Yeah, totally. I really want to give you an answer. Sorry for taking time. Give me a sec, will you? What is that really pisses me off? People say. I'll tell you. Like. The word like. The word like, just when it just perforates sentences and people are saying it all the time and it kind of tilts up at the end. Like, like, and you get it with it more and more. It's infiltrating Irish English to the point where every second word of people's sentences straight over from America seems to be like, and ending their sentences on the kind of an upspeak. A straightforward statement that's intoned like a question is always annoying. I want pizza. I want pizza. You know, like, why does it go up? It's not a question. That kind of thing. That pisses me off. Yeah.
Pharaoh's closing her mouth there
I
because
just
she
stop.
doesn't like a lot as
Say
well.
it.
I'm guilty.
Yeah, I'm guilty. You know, you can both hate a particular linguistic tick, but also use it. Like,
Yeah.
also like, use it. Yeah.
We had Adrian Rain on the podcast, and he's a criminal psychologist, and he said the exact same thing when I asked the
Really
question.
good man.
I
I
hate
must,
when people say
if I ever meet him,
yeah.
we'll perhaps bond over this.
this
Perhaps bond over
hatred
this.
of the current lingo.
Perhaps like bond over this. Yeah. Now I'm doing it in my head. What have you done to me? Ah.
I can't, Sarah, I'm out. I can't finish this. Okay, last question on my part, and then Sarah probably has one more. If you were not doing this, what would you be doing in life if you're not
Um,
an academic?
in an ideal world, where everybody has universal basic income or something like that, I'd probably be something art related, drawing, painting, that kind of thing. I do that in my spare time anyway, or kind of like writing very bad fiction. Maybe I'd be good at it by now. I don't know, but it'd be something creative like that. I like that kind of stuff. Anything that I can kind of tap into the kind of unconscious associations and things that swirl around in a kind of pre-rational state in my head, draw those things together, just into an image or something that I feel scratches something that I can't quite get at rationally. I really like that, and it's a source of nourishment for me. Too much rationality is impoverished and maddening. So I'd be doing something that I could really indulge in the anarchic unconscious side of my existence. Yeah. Instead, I'm an academic. Fuck. Oh,
Hugh, that totally matches your aesthetic, though. As an artist, I can envision it.
Nah, what kind of art do you do? What's your?
oh man, right. Like it's been a while since I've. I like portraiture, and I also lately I've gotten into making video, but with found things and kind of splicing them together. And I'm very primitively. I'm very bad at it. I should probably emphasize that. It's hard even to explain.
Would you like to be the editor of my podcast?
The editor of your podcast.
You can do the video editing stuff.
Oh man, I'm really bad at it. You would regret asking me to do that. I guarantee it. Unless you want a really lo-fi, backwards kind of 2003 Photoshop type aesthetic. If that's cool now, well then maybe.
Anything can be made cool. That's my belief.
Yeah.
You were the trendsetter, as you said in school, with your beliefs, and people just jumped on the bandwagon. Same thing.
The trendsetter.
Same thing.
Yeah.
All right. Final question. Is if you had one piece of advice to give the listeners, what would that be? Ask the listeners, everyone. What would that be?
Feel like I'm not the right person to advise anybody how to live their life. Think twice before you do a PhD. There's not that many jobs at the other end of it. Yeah.
Fair enough. I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Well, thanks so much, Hugh. Thanks so much for joining us. I look forward to having you. It was great. I feel like I've learned a lot and been able to relate to a lot of the things you've said as well, some of the ideas you throw up there. So it'd be really good to have you back on and talk about your results and see if I can remember most of the conversation as well. Yeah. Otherwise, you need to do a whole recap.
Yeah, I thought, yeah. Nice. Well, I'd love to anyway. Thanks for having me. So,
Yeah.
good luck, guys.
Awesome.
You.
Thanks for
Thanks.
being. And
Do I just
Thanks,
hang up here?
Hugh. Bye.
Okay.
No,
thanks,
just
guys. Take care,
just hold
everyone.
on.
Everyone, take care. Thanks for listening. And yeah, until next time.